Welcome to the Grand Theft World podcast, hosted and sponsored by GrandTheftWorld.com, now with 1,000 plus more paying members than CNN Plus. We're proud to bring you tonight's show. It's going to go on for the next 6 or 7 hours. We're going to take a reasonable look at unreasonable news. We're going to smash the current events and juxtapose them into the evidence, the artifacts, the first person whistleblowers in some of these cases. We're going to talk about stories in this past week of Grand Theft World history. Stories like,
Let me tell you something. When I be complaining about food prices and y'all be like, ain't you rich? Why you complaining about lettuce? Why you complaining about this? That just goes to show me when you become successful, when you have money, you're gonna go broke soon because y'all not budgeting. I get a summary of the money that's being spent in my home every week. So when I'm starting to see that like groceries is like tripling up, it's like, hey yo, what the is going on? I want to see for myself what the spend on. And like when I go to the supermarket, like I went to the supermarket, I'm seeing that everything tripled up. That like lettuce was like $2 a couple of months ago, and now it's like $7. Of course I'm gonna say something. Because if I think is crazy, I could only imagine what middle class people or people in the hood is thinking. So yes, I'm going to say something. And I have a big platform, so I do want anybody that's responsible of these prices to put down. They're gonna see might put it down. So shut.
remember that guy Jeffrey Epstein who didn't hang himself? Well, there's some new evidence that came out, and it's not his client list, but it did go after some of the people who facilitated his client list, like JP Morgan. Yeah, that big bank that dropped Kanye West a couple weeks ago, acting high and mighty. Well, they're named as a facilitator in the sex trafficking of Jeffrey Epstein. Now, the brave attorney general who brought this lawsuit forth in the Virgin Islands, U.S. Virgin Islands, was promptly fired by the former Vice President, Joseph Biden. So we're going to look into that story tonight, why people like that get fired when they start to find and pull the thread of corruption, because I think it goes to the tapestry that we see in mainstream media pretty deeply.
Now at 5, banking giant JP Morgan Chase is under fire, accused of benefiting from sex trafficking by billionaire Jeffrey Epstein. Now this comes after an attorney in the U.S. Virgin Islands filed suit Tuesday, saying the bank failed to report suspicious activity. The lawsuit accuses the bank of not complying with federal regulations and failing to make proper regulatory filings that could have tipped the government off to Epstein's alleged sex trafficking ring of underage girls.
So we have some very interesting and new information. I've always thought that the Virgin Islands could be one of the areas where their prosecutors and their team very much wanted to try and get to the bottom of this. And a new filing in the U.S. Attorney's Office is devastating for one of the major financial institutions in the country. Let's put this up there on the screen. Epstein's trafficking was aided by JP Morgan. This is according to a new lawsuit from the U.S. Virgin Islands Attorney General's office that was filed in the Southern District of Manhattan on Tuesday. Essentially, what they are alleging is that JP Morgan failed to report Epstein's suspicious activities and actually provided the financier with services reserved for high wealth clients even after a 2008 conviction for soliciting a minor for prostitution in Palm Beach, Florida. They specifically say that they have information which has revealed that JP Morgan knowingly, negligently, and unlawfully provided and pulled the levers through which recruiters and victims were paid and was indispensable to the operation and concealment of the Epstein trafficking enterprise. So, why does all of this matter? We should go back and remember a New York Financial Services Department fine of JP Morgan, of Deutsche Bank, and of other financial institutions, which showed specifically that the banks were involved in a collusion process to go after Epstein's business and specifically facilitated his own transactions from the United States to Eastern Europe, presumably, and in many cases towards women who were being used for sex trafficking purposes. Why does that matter? Because Epstein himself and his network and organization were pulling all sorts of financial chicanery that if you or I tried to pull, Crystal, we would be automatically reported to the FBI. And in fact, one of those, my personal favorite example from the Financial Services Department complaint was when they would say, how much cash can we withdraw without triggering the feds? By the way, just asking that question, you're supposed to call the feds. and they engage in regular behavior where they would try and withdraw as much cash as possible without triggering an automatic regulatory informing to federal authorities. This is just the tip of the iceberg. What the U.S. Virgin Islands is doing here is revealing it at the major meta financial institutional level, of which, remember, we have no transparency. Outside of that financial services fine that happened for Deutsche Bank in, I think it was in 2021, we have no more clarity because the Ghislaine Maxwell trial focused on crimes. And I'm not saying these weren't valid, but on things that happened in so far limited in scope and so long time ago. The actual architect of all of the power networks, the people like Leon Black, the billionaires, the Wall Street, the financial institutions, all of it remains outside of public record. So this is a very important case that's happening here. I also want to read a quote from the lawsuit that she filed before she was fired. These decisions were advocated and approved at the senior levels of JP Morgan, who facilitated and concealed wire and cash transactions that raised suspicious of and were in fact part of a criminal enterprise whose currency was the sexual servitude of dozens of women and girls in and beyond the U.S. Virgin Islands. This lawsuit is, again, the tip of the iceberg. And if it actually was allowed to proceed, we would have gotten financial statements, subpoenas, possibly of senior JP Morgan executives, account managers, some of the other sophisticated financial chicanery that Epstein and all of his coterie were involved in.
Why exactly was former Attorney General Denise George fired on the last day of the year? Consortium journalists on Saturday broke the news that George had been terminated by Bryan just days after it was revealed that in her capacity as AG, she had filed suit against JP Morgan Chase, the largest bank in the United States and the world's largest bank by market capitalization. The lawsuit claimed JP Morgan Chase facilitated convicted felon Jeffrey Epstein's abuse of women and girls, alleging that the bank should have known about his criminal activities and, as part of its anti-money laundering procedures, should have reported their client to authorities. George, through the lawsuit, accused the bank of turning a blind eye to Epstein's sex trafficking operations that were based on the disgraced financier's private island in the USVI, Little St. James. George reportedly initiated the legal proceedings without first informing Governor Bryan of such a major move, according to confidential sources with knowledge of the matter. Our sources tell us that this was the final straw for the governor, who was reportedly growing increasingly frustrated with George.
President Biden welcomed in the new year in the US Virgin Islands while on holiday with First Lady Jill Biden. After celebrating New Year's on the islands in 2015 and 2016, this is Mr. Biden's first Caribbean holiday as president. The White House says the president will travel to the southeastern state of Kentucky later this week to promote his new economic plan.
We're also going to talk about stories like Twitter rigged the COVID situation. They rigged feedback. They created psychological warfare and propaganda landscape. They minefield the whole place. They did censorship. They did uninformed, non-consent campaigns to convince people to take a experimental gene therapy. And these sort of things are problematic for the future of freedom. So we're going to look into more of those Twitter files, debates that are coming out.
And as we said, we know about it because of Matt Taibbi, who has been at the center of it. He joins us tonight. Matt, thanks so much for coming on. So I would just offer to our audience your extensive reporting on this, which is on Twitter and on your Substack. But to summarize, having looked at these documents for weeks now, how deep was the penetration of Twitter by U.S. law enforcement and intel agencies?
I think we can say pretty conclusively after looking at tens of thousands of emails over the course of these weeks that the government was in the censorship business in a huge way. That's, I think, provable now. And not just one agency, really every conceivable wing of the enforcement agencies of the U.S. government were in some way or another sending moderation requests to Twitter. And in many cases, those requests were being fulfilled. And they were coming from everywhere, from every place from the NSA to the HHS to FBI, DHS, and even what they call other government agencies, which I think is code for the CIA. So we have reports from all over, from states, from police departments, everywhere.
So that's prima facie illegal. It's unconstitutional. Government cannot censor political speech. It could not be clearer. Our assumption is that this was made possible because of hysteria about Russian penetration of our politics. Is that your read of it?
Absolutely, yeah. I think the thread that I put out yesterday traces the history of what happened, particularly in the fall of 2017. Twitter somewhat naively thought that they would not be sucked into the Russiagate phenomenon. They really thought this was going to be Facebook's problem alone. But when it started to become politically very difficult for them, and people like the ranking Democrat on the Senate Intel Committee, Mark Warner, the senator of Virginia, put pressure on them. There's an email that talked about how he was pressuring them to, quote, keep producing material for them. Ultimately, Twitter ended up caving, and by the end of the year, they had an internal guidance, which I think is very significant, where they said publicly, we will only remove content at our sole discretion. Privately, we will remove content, any content that's identified by the United States intelligence community as a foreign state actor conducting cyber operations. So if the intel community says we take it down, we're going to take it down.
We have yet to see those Fauci files, but they are promised within the next week or so. Also, this past week, do you remember when the former Fuji Lauryn Hill had some thoughts that went against maybe the social norms, and they, you know, it was famous because she was a Grammy winner, I think, for the miseducation of Lauryn Hill, and then it turned into the re-education of Lauryn Hill. Well, this past week, the good Dr. Jordan Peterson was sentenced to re-education in order to hold on to his medical license in Canada. He no longer needs his license. He's gone warp speed. He's out of their stratosphere. He's out of their control. So we'll see what type of challenges he might put up, what type of feedback and pushback he might have for them. And also, can he be dominated by a scienceism type of career that wants to control people's thoughts and their words, especially? That's how he got in trouble in the first place, using words that you're not supposed to use. It's kind of like Kanye West. A lot of people get in trouble for words these days.
We got the story from timcast.com. Canadian college threatens Jordan Peterson's medical license, demands social media communications training. Christopher Bertman wrote this story. These journalists, I got to tell you, here's my headline suggestion. Jordan Peterson threatened with revocation, is that the right word, of medical license unless he submits to re-education.
Yeah. The College of Psychologists, a bunch of people put in power by the government basically, is threatening to take my dad's psychology license because he's been criticizing the government. This isn't a joke. This has been torturing my family since 2018. Seriously bullying my dad in a way that really caused everyone in my family a lot of stress. I think it's part of what contributed to him being quite ill in 2019, 2020. The colleges are in charge of doctors, massage therapists, dentists. They've been around since about the 60s, and it turns out, which I guess isn't that surprising, they've been infiltrated by the government, and now it looks like they're being used to control particularly conservative working professionals. Think you can trust your doctor to talk to you about anything that the government doesn't back? Definitely not, although we probably already knew that. This is kind of how colleges work in part. So this is how bad it is. He's getting investigated because of tweets he's tweeted, personal tweets, opinions, things he said on Joe Rogan. It's such a scam too. They're requiring him to do media retraining that he pays $225 an hour for an unspecified amount of time. And then at the end of that training, they decide whether or not he's learned anything and whether he can continue being a psychologist. This isn't even a process that goes to court. It's just this regulatory board of like 12 tyrannical individuals. It's crazy that what you say online can be used to get rid of your license if people don't like you politically, which doesn't sound very democratic to me. They don't like his opinions, so they're trying to shut him down. But right now, it's in a very real way. The tweets they've identified as problematic include the tweet about Elliot Page. Dad's trying to protect kids from being sterilized. That's definitely not appropriate. The tweet about the obese woman on Sports Illustrated. Again, obesity should not be celebrated. It kills people. And then tweets criticizing Justin Trudeau and another member of the Liberal Party, threatening to take your job as a serious threat. Anybody can submit a complaint about a psychologist or a doctor for that matter. Anybody. Doesn't have to be a former client. So for Dad, it's random people on Twitter complaining about him. Out of his audience of 20 million, he has 12 complaints. The college could throw these complaints out, but instead they're threatening him and have been for years, wasting his time, bullying him, and threatening to take his license.
New York State is the 6th state to approve human compost. So it's no longer burial or cremation as your options. Now you can go be part of a fertilizer that is used to feed people. I thought there was a Charlton Heston movie back in the 70s, something about Soylent Green is people. I don't think they're doing that today. They wouldn't do that because that was a science fiction dystopian movie, and they certainly wouldn't be creating things like that in our world today, would they?
New York has become the latest US state to introduce human composting. It follows Colorado, Oregon, and Washington, which first legalized the practice in 2019. The process allows a person's body to be turned into soil after their death. Local firms believe the decision will drive down the state's carbon footprint when compared with a cremation or traditional burial.
Forget the cemeteries and the crematoriums. Now New Yorkers can choose a greener option and have their bodies composted. Vidal says the end result is several wheelbarrows full of nutrient-dense soil that can be used to plant trees, forests, or gardens.
Next, we have Joe Biden's administration. Evidence that they tried to hide the Wuhan leak and anyone talking about the leak, which tells me, the average reader, that they weren't concerned on the mysterious origins. They, in fact, know why it was going on. They just didn't want you to know why, because an uninformed public is an easily controlled public.
All right. We are anxiously awaiting the Fauci files, by the way.
We didn't get that, but we got a little bit. I mean, I think it's juicy. You decide for yourself how juicy you think this is. Basically, the U.S. State Department was actively flagging Twitter accounts that was pushing the Wuhan lab leak story and other things that they did not want you to talk about on Twitter. This is another batch of the Twitter files, the files that Elon Musk has allowed journalists to see into how and why Twitter censorship became such a beast. We had 2 new rounds released on Tuesday by journalist Matt Taibbi, and they are just as insidious as the rest. So this thread shows that Twitter and the FBI were frustrated with public and private agencies going straight to the media with their lists of problematic Twitter accounts. One such agency was the Global Engagement Center, which is an arm of the U.S. State Department. So the Global Engagement Center, the State Department, was able to get the media to bite on this narrative that any accounts that were publishing COVID concerns were Russian misinformation campaigns, and also Chinese, and also Iranian. Here are 2 news headlines that just picked that up and ran with them. Agency France, Russia-linked disinformation campaign fueling coronavirus alarm, U.S. says. The article itself says that thousands of Russian-linked social media accounts have launched a coordinated effort to spread alarm about COVID, according to U.S. officials, and it's a big disinformation campaign promoting unfounded conspiracy theories that the U.S. is behind the COVID outbreak in a bid to damage the U.S. agency, the U.S. image around the world. State departments are saying that false personas are being used on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and other places. So, Agency France went with this. Politico did too. Another report from Politico. Russian, Chinese, and Iranian disinformation narratives echo each other. They are all doing it. Again, from this article, China, Iran, and Russia are using COVID crisis to launch a propaganda and disinformation onslaught against the U.S., the State Department writes in a new report. Now, in hindsight, that seems quite laughable, given what we now know about COVID and the Central Intelligence Agency. What they had been doing online is creating social media accounts in other countries to sow discord. They're doing that. For sure, right? But the State Department says, no, those countries are doing this about COVID to me, to us, right? But the media picked these stories up like a good little dog. When Twitter was pushed to back these assertions up, they couldn't. Clemson University was trying to publish research again on Russian disinformation and asked Twitter why they couldn't get the results they wanted. Even Joel Roth, who is featured frequently in these Twitter files working with the government, he seemed to want to be very obliging to government requests in previous Twitter files, but he didn't like this request.
Last but not least, stories like
Senator Antic.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Deputy President. Australian cities are becoming digital surveillance precincts, with so-called smart city programs being rolled out across the country. Invasive technology such as facial recognition cameras, licence plate readers, smart lights, smart poles, smart cars, smart neighbourhoods, smart homes and smart appliances, all connected to wireless networks and communicating with each other. So what's wrong with that? Technology is good, isn't it? All this is for your safety, security and convenience, isn't it? Well, let me tell you, your streets are spying on you, your mobile phone is spying on you, your cities are spying on you, and the infrastructure for future lockdowns is being put into place right now. Don't be fooled. You're being set up to be tracked through your movements and through the future of your digital wallets. By handing over your data, you're handing over the ability to monitor your behaviour, which will soon be turned into a social credit score. And once the central bank digital currencies are in place, you won't get to spend your money without approval. Digital ID will soon become a reality in Australia. Many other countries are already rolling these systems out, countries like Canada, Scotland and many others. Eventually, you won't be able to access any government or public services, and you won't be able to travel across borders or access healthcare or the internet without a digital ID. Think you won't comply? I think you will. The last 2 years were the dress rehearsal and we fell for it hook, line and sinker. Australians are sleepwalking into this technocratic future, and while we're sitting around scratching our chins trying to work out whether this is really happening, Australia is drifting towards a dystopian digital future.
So we're going to look into these stories. Before we can do that, let's go to this week's kickoff with Luke Radowski from wearechange.org and thebestpoliticalshirts.com. Let's get his Sunday summary, and then we'll start digging in to the cornucopia of content that follows. Hang on.
A very frustrated Kevin McCarthy acting like he's some kind of alpha male, walking up to Matt Gaetz and Lauren Boebert as if this is going to intimidate them. Matt Gaetz is like, man, look, I know you're a soy boy, all right? I know you're a part of the swamp. Kevin McCarthy's like, I know you know that I have no interest in helping the American people. I have every interest in helping Ukraine and filling my pockets up. You got that, Gaetz? Matt Gaetz is like, thanks for clearing that up, you Manchurian candidate. Now get the out of here. And, of course, out of the blue, it's Mike Rogers. He's looking a little pissed, looking to back up McCarthy. Oh, my God, it appears they're going to drag him out by his face. And Kevin McCarthy has no idea. Now he's going back. What's going on here, man? Mike Rogers comes in like he's Tony Soprano, but that's a tough thing to do when you're wearing a toupee like that. My God, it looks like Chris Farley's playing a character in SNL. Pulls a Will Smith, and he's like, you keep my boyfriend McCarthy's name out your mouth. And McCarthy's like, what the hell is going on? And for the first time ever, Mike Rogers becomes the first politician to be featured on the Ludicrous Cam.
Now that's what you call a negotiation.
Is there something you really want to do in 2023, but you're not quite sure how to make it happen? And join us for the Autonomy Mindset and Goal Setting Workshop. This is the perfect event for you if you want to take control of your life and achieve your goals. You'll be guided through the process of goal setting and learn how to create achievable goals and develop a positive mindset. Our experienced team of Autonomy students will be on hand to help you identify your strengths and weaknesses and equip you with the skills and tools you need to live big in 2023. Join us for a fantastic day of community, inspiration, and personal growth. You'll leave feeling empowered and motivated, ready to take on the world. The event will be held on Sunday, January 15th. Register early so you can secure your spot. We look forward to seeing you at the Autonomy Mindset and Goal Setting Workshop.